My name is Brendan Mahan. I'm an ADHD coach, consultant, speaker, host of the ADHD Essentials Podcast. I'm on the organizing committee for the International Conference on ADHD for like another month probably, and then I'm going to step away from that. I'm on the board of the Men's ADHD Support Group, and I am also on the board of directors for an event called Comic-Con, which is a sensory sensitive pop culture convention. So it's basically Comic-Con, only for folks with ADHD and autism and that kind of stuff. And my role in Comic-Con is I bring professional resources to it. So like mental health clinicians and McLean Hospital's anxiety and OCD program and that kind of stuff. So that's who I am and what I do. I work one-on-one with folks who have ADHD. I run parenting groups for parents who are affected by ADHD. There's a few people in the audience who have been to those groups, but I'm not going to reveal anybody because that would be breaking confidentiality. You guys can, but I'm not going to. And I also am in the process of writing a book on a model I have called The Wall of Awful that will come up in the course of this. And yeah, that's me. So as we go through this, we're going to be talking about adult ADHD, not like kids and stuff, but if you're a parent and you have questions, feel free to ask me that. If you want to go like sort of wander away from ADHD and ask me about some other mental health stuff, if I can answer those questions, I will. If I can't, I'll tell you that I can't, and I'll help you find resources and people who can, because I probably know them. So yeah, all right. So here's the plan. We're going to talk about ADHD basics, then we're going to go into some common ADHD challenges, then we're going to go into solutions. The solutions are really going to happen the whole time. Like I can't not solve problems when I name them. It's like a problem I have that I haven't figured out how to solve yet. And then we'll do a Q&A. Just ask questions. Like feel free to interrupt me and go, but Brendan, what is this thing?
But Brendan.
See, exactly, perfect. I was like, yes.
3 different types that I've explained about ADHD, like the inattentive versus the next cat. There we go. Yeah, that's me, number 1.
All right, so ADHD
That's
basics.
how you break it down.
Yeah, well,
so I
yeah.
can follow.
Yeah. Before we do that, though, I want to talk about why the name stinks. The name is terrible. The name is, in fact, trouble. ADHD was named by people who don't have ADHD, and it sucks out loud. I hope I can say that on public access television. Because ADHD is about way more than just attention. It's not a deficit of attention. Like, I don't have a deficit of attention. That's not what goes on for me. What happens is I don't control my attention well, right? So if I'm talking to you and I'm like, huh? That doesn't mean that I lack attention. I'm just not pointing my attention where it should be, right? It's on my phone. And that might be appropriate. If I'm getting text that's like, Dad's in the hospital, come now, right? Then it's totally appropriate that I'm doing this. But if I'm playing a video game or looking at like Instagram, which I sometimes have to do for my job, so that could go either way. I need to be able to judge where should my attention be and is it appropriate that it's there or not, right? And I don't always do that very well. Because one thing I forgot to mention is I have ADHD. So that's another way that I get it, right? My lens on ADHD comes from a lot of different angles. I have it, so I live it every day. My kids have it. It's okay, they've been on the podcast and stuff, it's public. I used to be a teacher, so I've taught in classrooms about ADHD, and I do it professionally, right? Like to the degree that I'm on the organizing committee for the conference and present there regularly and all that stuff. So I come at it from a number of different angles. I have a master's in education and a master's in counseling. I've done teaching work. I've been a principal at Al-Hamra, the private Islamic school around the corner, for like a half a year when the principal went out on maternity leave. And I've worked as like a teacher in a classroom, both in special ed and the regular classroom. And I've worked kindergarten through high school and preschool as well. So I've seen ADHD from a lot of angles, both before I knew what it was and after I knew what it was. So back to the name. It's not a deficit of attention. It's not that we are not tuned in. We're just not always able to put our attention where it needs to be when it needs to be there. Like that dude walking by is totally distracting me.
He's what?
The guy walking by. I was just,
Distracting you?
yeah, what are you doing? I'm presenting in here. Why are you outside walking back the windows? Also, ADHD is not always hyperactive. This is probably the thing that drives me the craziest about the name change. ADHD is now officially ADHD. ADD doesn't exist anymore. They did away with it. I wish they had called it ADD,
Yeah.
and then some people get the H, because then I could call it adulting deficit disorder, and that would make me so happy. But I don't get to do that because I can't figure out what to do with the H.
When did the change take place?
Pre-COVID, and that's why I can't remember, because COVID has ruined my ability to understand time in like year spans. It wasn't great to begin with, but now it's just like over. Yeah, so it's pre-COVID, so that shockingly is like 5 years ago, which, oh my God.
Yep.
I want to say it was around 2019, but don't quote me on that, because I might be wrong. We'll talk about working memory later, and that'll be the reason why I'm bad at it. ADHD is a disorder, though. I have a T-shirt that says ADHD Life on Hard Mode, and I can share the link with you guys if you want to buy it, because it supports the Men's ADHD Support Group. It does make your life harder, and there are folks out there who are like, ADHD is a superpower. No, it's not. Money is a superpower, and privilege is a superpower. If you have those two things, and you have ADHD, you can do cool stuff with your ADHD, because you can absorb the failures better than someone who doesn't have those things. And you can lean into your strengths more readily, but that doesn't make ADHD a superpower. And saying so does a disservice to everybody who has it, including the people who think it's a superpower, because every now and then it's not, and they don't know what to do because they thought it was a superpower. So I stand firmly on that hill, and we'll die on it. Yeah?
Where do you stand? I know there are some mental health professionals who consider that ADHD should also be considered a mental disability of some kind, similar to a learning disability.
Yeah, it's totally learning disability.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I go deeper on that when I do stuff on kids, but I can play with that later if you want me to. 3 kinds of ADHD. There are 3 kinds of ADHD. Primarily inattentive, poo, right? The kid who's just, like they're out to lunch. They're not really tuned in. They don't know what's going on. Primarily hyperactive, the kid that's driven by a motor. I'm sure most of you have probably heard that phrase. They just don't stop. They keep going and they're full of energy and da-da-da-da-da. And then combined, right? The kid who walks in a waltz. The kid who doesn't stop but also doesn't pay attention. And I make that joke with love because I'm one of them. And I don't think I've walked into a wall, but I've walked into other stuff. So these are our 3 kinds. I'm not going to really dig around too much with these. I'm not going to go, like as I present, I'm not going to say, this one is more inattentive and this one is more hyperactive. I can if you want me to, but it's kind of self-explanatory, right? The stuff that seems more inattentive, folks with an inattentive subtype are going to be more affected by that stuff. The stuff that seems more hyperactive, your hyperactive folks get hit more by it. I am combined. And like my wife is a saint. That's my wife. So she's very nice to me and puts up with my nonsense. The first thing we want to know when it comes to the ADHD brain is that we're dealing with dopamine. Norepinephrine is in here too, but it's less exciting and less interesting. Dopamine is really the linchpin for the stuff that you guys are going to want to know about. So dopamine, how many of you have heard that dopamine is like the brain's happy chemical? Have any of you heard that? Burn that in a fire, like throw that away and light it on fire and be done with it, because it's not true. And the reason I want you to burn it to bits is because it obfuscates ADHD traits in a way that isn't useful. And if we can see them in the light of that fire, then it will make more sense why people with ADHD do stuff that seems like a bad idea. So dopamine is the brain's anticipation and reward chemical. It makes us want to do stuff, right? Dopamine rewards the brain. It doesn't reward us. Like, we're not going to be like, I feel so emotionally great because I got some dopamine. Maybe, but maybe not. What's going to happen is I'm going to get engaged when dopamine is there. I'm going to be more interested, more able to activate, more engaged. That's really the best word. So I am going to zero in on stimulation whenever possible. A dude walked by these windows in the dark. I could barely see him, and I was still like, why is that guy walking by the windows? What's going on? Exactly, right? And that's any kind of stimulation. Matt just moved his arm, and I was like, that happened. Is he raising his hand? Does he want to ask a question? If there is no stimulation, the ADHD brain will happily make some, right? This is the kid that starts talking in class. This is the person who is bored and argues, right? And therein lies why we want to get rid of the idea that ADHD is the happy chemical. Like, no one is happy when they argue. There's not, unless you're like a psychopath, arguing with people doesn't bring you joy. It might engage you, it might stimulate you, but you're not coming out of a heated argument and being like, woohoo, that was great. You're coming out of it feeling frustrated, feeling angry, feeling maybe victorious, depending on how you argue. But it's not as though you're full of joy, right? But arguing is full of dopamine. That's a big piece of why it's so engaging. That's why people with ADHD will be there on Twitter, like, right? That's why sometimes you ask your spouse who has ADHD to do something and they get upset, right? Like, hey, can you do the dishes? Well, I'll do them later, right? Well, now we're fighting over doing the dishes. And then all of a sudden they're doing the dishes, right? Because they got enough dopamine in their brain to do something, and now they're doing it. Because we need dopamine to activate. And so sometimes a fight gets picked in order to do a thing. I don't think I do that too much, but I might be talking later if I'm being a jerk.
We'll be asking her.
Yeah, you guys can feel free to interview her. And what I want to kind of have as a thought here, right? This applies to kids, it applies to adults, it applies to everybody. All behavior is communication, all behavior serves a purpose, right? So when we feel like someone's doing it wrong, that's a strategy that maybe used to work at one point and doesn't work now. Or it's a strategy that is like the best they have, right? And we just have to help them get better strategies. Yeah.
To teach them how a behavior that can replace.
Right.
Behavior.
And that's my job as a coach, right? That's one of the things that I do. And I still screw stuff up. I still do things wrong in my day-to-day, right? Because none of us are perfect. But it's just a thing to keep in mind, right? That this dopamine is playing this significant role. Yeah, go ahead.
Just talking about
Mhm.
dopamine and reward. Just curious about digital dependency
Mm-hmm.
and sort of is ADHD, particularly the inattentive type, a part of that, or is that just all kids?
Yes, and. Yes, it's all kids, kind of, sort of, right? But in the same way that, where did I put it? So I have asthma, right? If I go into a smoky room, I am going to struggle more than someone who doesn't have asthma. So a kid with ADHD is going to struggle more with the smoky room that is modern society and the level of screens and technology that everybody is having trouble with. Someone with ADHD will struggle with that more. Potentially. They don't have to. I work with kids who don't have issues with screens. I've had kids come to my parent groups, and parents are like, my kids don't have that problem at all. I've had other parents who are like, oh my God, my kid. I worked with a parent whose kid literally bought a burner phone to because their parents took their phone away, and they bought another phone from a friend that was stolen to be able to get on the internet, right? So I've done both. When it comes to phones and technology, particularly with kids, since that's what you're asking, but adults too, we want to think about, one, what kind of boundaries are we setting, and how can we set boundaries that work and are healthy and are not over-responding, right? That particular family, mom was like, I just want to take his phone away. And I was like, it's not going to work. He's just going to buy a stolen phone. Turns out he did. Instead, I actually had her loosen up because he was using his phone all night long. He had his phone in his room the whole time, and the phone was supposed to be out at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock and all this stuff. I pushed the parents to give the kid the wiggle room to have the phone until 10, right? But the deal was, it's gone. at 10. We put it in the hallway or whatever. And he handled that for like a week, and then it went to 10:30, and we had problems, right? But like set boundaries that are going to work, that are realistic. And the other piece to phones is what other options do they have? And this is tricky, right? My own kids are on their phones more than I would like. And I'm like, do other stuff. And they do. I literally bought a gingerbread house kit today because it was a half day. And I was like, build a gingerbread house if you got nothing else. Instead, they did the dishes and walked the dog and were responsible. A bunch of chumps. They could have made a gingerbread house. But I also try to push them to hang out with friends. And like they're text kids, and the kids don't do anything. Like no one goes and does anything. I think my guys have an extra complicating factor, and for those of you who, it doesn't. I have identical twin sons. This doesn't have to apply to identical twins, but if you've got a kid that's got a buddy, I think part of the challenge when my guys invite people is, if I'm one kid and two kids invite me somewhere, like if two kids send a text message to the text group, the first kid to say yes is running the risk of being the only kid that's hanging out with the best friends. Does that make sense? And that feels anxiety inducing. My kids happen to be born as a unit and are best friends all the time and stay together. And so they always have this problem when they try to invite people places. But if your kid has like a buddy that they always do stuff with, we could have a similar problem. But they need to have an option besides their phone, right? What else could you do? I challenged my kids to run one-shot D&D campaigns over the winter holiday, and both of them were like, okay. And now they're doing that instead of looking at their phones. But we got to have another option. If there isn't another option, the phone is easy. And it's tricky because the phone, and I know I'm kind of derailing a little bit, but hopefully this is helpful. One of the problems with a phone is that this thing doesn't only do one thing, right? So if I'm sending an email and then the next thing I know, I'm playing Candy Crush, how did I get to Candy Crush, right? Let me see what the weather is. Well, apparently it's raining on Facebook because that's what I'm looking at, right? That's the problem with this, is there's no strong boundaries within the phone itself. So when I go onto the phone for good reason, I often get diverted into nonsense. And our kids have to navigate that too, right? And they have to learn how. That's part of the challenge of this, is these phones aren't going away. So our 12-year-old is going to be 35. If they can't figure out how to do a phone at least reasonably well between 12 and 20, 35-year-old them is going to struggle, right? So I don't think the solution necessarily is to take the phone away. I do think the solution is to limit what the phone can do so that they're more likely to be doing responsible stuff, get the social media off of it. There's countries that are passing laws of like you can't even use social media until you're 16, 18, that kind of stuff. And I think that's totally valid. But yeah, so that's some of the challenges the phone works for people with ADHD. Comorbidities. Yes. I know you guys are hoping for that. So ADHD typically only travels by itself about 30% of the time. Otherwise, we're getting other stuff. And these numbers all add up to way more than 100% because that's how it goes, right? But people with ADHD might have autism spectrum disorder. That number's gonna go up. It's gonna go up.
They changed how they evaluate.
Yeah. There's already people who are like, ADHD is just autism spectrum disorder. And I'm like, no, it's not. They're different, but they're really close, right? They're really, really close. It's mostly the autistic folks who are like, no, you have autism. I don't. I have ADHD. But I get it. They're cousins. They're really similar. Oppositional defiance, dyslexia and dyscalculia, anxiety, depression, tic disorders, dyspraxia, OCD can come in here. And so too does addiction. Yeah.
What's dyspraxia?
Dyspraxia is like clumsiness, kind of. It's like I can be diagnosed with clumsiness. So it's just I am not as coordinated. I don't have as good of a sense of like proprioception and that kind of stuff. So one thing that I wanna mention, right, is substance misuse is a heavy component for ADHD. Because all addiction starts with dopamine, all of it. And I've worked with people who do addiction work, and like I was the protective factor guy. That's why you can be addicted to your phone even though there's no chemical. The chemical is dopamine, right? That's why you can be addicted to gambling and whatever else, right? Video games. Although some of that stuff, like, I don't know about video games. Some of that's misinterpreting stuff. Yes, you can be addicted, but it's not always. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to ask, going back to the comorbidities, if
Yep.
you've seen anything about CPTSD and ADHD.
Yeah, that, I don't feel like I'm going out on too much of a limb if I say if you have ADHD, you also have trauma and probably PTSD somewhere, right?
Mm.
ADHD and complex trauma go hand in hand. And it's not capital T trauma necessarily. It can be. It's mostly, I shouldn't say mostly, but it's, if it's not capital T trauma, if it's not I was abused, I witnessed a murder, I was assaulted, like that kind of stuff, even if that stuff has happened, what ADHD is bringing is trauma by a million little cuts. And that's my wall of awful model, which we're going to play with later on. But that absolutely complex trauma is a piece of it. And that CPSD is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And post-traumatic stress growth is a thing. That is not on these slides, but I interviewed the guy who coined the term for my show. It's not too far back, I don't think, because I posted twice. So that's worth looking at. I interviewed him during COVID because I was like, this is a worldwide trauma event. What about post-traumatic growth? So if that's something that's interesting, you can find that on my show. So Dr. William Dodson talks about ADHD, and he talks about it as an interest-based nervous system. This is the fundamental misalignment of ADHD with the rest of the world that is useful to know. People with ADHD are engaged by stuff that is novel, interesting, challenging, urgent, and aligns with their passions. That's the stuff that we dig, right? I've talked to Bill about this, and I'm like, interesting and passion are kind of the same thing, right? And he tries to say that it's not, but it kind of is. The way I split that hair for me is interesting is it engages me cognitively. Passion is it engages me emotionally. Now, typically, if it engages me intellectually, it's going to engage me emotionally too, and vice versa. But that's kind of how I split that hair, just to let Bill have nitmuck or nick up. Nitmuck is different. But this is useful to think about for your ADHD people in your lives. Unless you have ADHD, then it's useful to think about for you and tell the person who loves you what's up with this. This explains why we struggle with stuff that's boring, right? Like, God, it's just stupid dishes and email and all those boring, tedious things that are so hard because they're not novel, right? There's nothing novel about email or doing the dishes. And they're not interesting, nor is it really challenging necessarily. If it was challenging, it would probably be interesting or novel. And they're not urgent until they're urgent, right? And then it's like, Brendan, if you don't do the dishes, I can't cook dinner. And if I can't cook dinner, we can't eat. And if we can't eat, we're all gonna die, right? Like that's a thing. Now it's urgent. And that's part of the problem with ADHD is stuff that is important, hey, just like pick up around the house or whatever, doesn't raise to significance enough for my dumb brain to go, hey, have some dopamine, right? Like that's not how it works. I have to take Concerta, because I'm on meds, not anymore, they worn off. But I need ADHD meds to help me have the availability of that dopamine to do the thing, right? Before it becomes urgent, to get it done while it's still only important. Yeah.
So if you're not ADHD, do you feel anxiety sooner or later than if you have ADHD?
Oh, so much love. This is gonna blow your mind. If you don't have ADHD, you don't need to feel anxiety to do the thing. So it's not a matter of, right? It's not a matter of feeling it sooner. It's a matter of not needing that to be able to do whatever it is that you want to do. You can just do it, which is banana pants. Like, I don't know how that works. My wife does. She's looking at me like I'm crazy. She's like, what, huh? I know you have been married to me for 20 years. I know, that's how you work. But like, it's, you just can't. My buddy, John Hassel, who lives in Australia, he was working with a couple. I love this story. He was working with a couple, and they were like discussing sort of household chores and that kind of stuff, and it was a little tense. And the husband turned to the wife and went, "But you love doing that stuff." And she was like, "What? What do you mean I love doing that stuff?" And he was like, "Huh?" Totally, he didn't mean it like misogynistically at all. He has ADHD, and he was like, "But I can only do stuff that I love to do." So his math made sense. He was like, my wife must love cleaning up the house because she can do it, right? Not him. And John intervened quick on that one. He was like, no, I know what's happening. It's fine. John totally didn't do it that way, though, because he's not as hyperactive as I am. But so, like this, if we look at this from a neurotypical lens, we start to see why ADHD becomes problematic, right? Because we struggle to do the thing, unless it's really engaging, which is screwy, right? Like, I've talked to a number of my ADHD friends at this point. The one that I first had this conversation with was Jessica McCabe, who does How to ADHD. And like, we'll do stuff to try to change the world, right? Like, I'm trying to change the world, but I can't keep my car clean and I can't keep my office clean. But I can try to write a New York Times bestseller, which I'm in the process of doing, right? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me even, but it's how ADHD works, right? The big thing, the big interesting thing, that writing a book and trying to make it a New York Times bestseller is novel and interesting and challenge. It's not exactly urgent, but there's a little bit of urgency for me because I lost a lot of ground during COVID and I need to get it back. And the way to do that is to get this book going. And it aligns with my passions and my interests because I have ADHD and the book is about supporting that and those sorts of things. This is what gets ADHD going. It's just there's a lot of stuff in the world that is not this that we still have to do. That's why I wish it was ADD, because most of adulting is not this. Most adulting behaviors are not this. They're like, yeah, just go to the doctor and get that tooth looked at, or as a dentist. Go to the dentist and get your tooth looked at, right? Or find out why you have that blemish on your skin or something. But that stuff isn't any of this. It's just self-care. So you've got to reframe and rethink how stuff works. Yeah.
Sorry, is Dodson the one who wrote ADHD 2.0?
No, that's Ned Hallowell.
Okay.
And it ADHD 2.0 was fine. Ned's he's a little,
Right.
yeah. I mean, he's not like that bad, but he's,
Okay.
You had said interesting was cognitive, and then what did you say, passion?
emotions. That's my division, though. Like, I made that split. So
Yeah. That's
I'm not trying to put that on Bill.
Yeah. Thanks.
So common ADHD challenges. I'm going to go through these kind of quick. We're about a half an hour in. It's 7:35. And there's a bunch of these. But feel free to be like, slow down, let's talk about that one. And then we'll talk about that one. So the first, executive function. This is a monster. I could spend the next 2 hours on executive function. I'm not gonna. It's really big. Executive function in a nutshell is being able to do the thing. It's your ability to execute. Right there is our first little thing. Executive function volcanoes with Monica Hassel. That's John's wife from Connect Ed. She's Australian, so be ready for the accent. Executive function, there isn't even one model of executive function that gets used, right? Like even that gets danced around and there's different people who have different ideas on it. The gist of it is like all the stuff that I need to be able to do something, right? So activation, regulating my emotions, planning, prioritizing, self-talk, attending to the thing that I need to do, being able to inhibit my impulses and not do the things that I don't want to do. And that's not just like picking up a chair and throwing it out the window because I'm angry. That's also like, I went to check the weather and I didn't go on Facebook, right? Like I just checked the weather. That's inhibited, right? And then flexible thinking, being able to move and adjust with changes in schedules. Some of your kids might be feeling that right now. We're in the midst of this train wreck of a schedule shift. Some of you as adults might be feeling that right now because Thanksgiving just wrapped up and that was a weird week. We got more weird weeks coming. It's the holidays. Today was a half day at school if you've got kids at school. That might have thrown things off. Like there's a lot of reasons for our schedules to be messed up in these months, and that can throw us off. I hate Monday holidays with the burning passion of 1,000 suns. Like every Monday holiday throws me off for the week to some degree, greater or lesser, but it just is weird. To such a degree that like I just keep my clients meeting with me on Monday holidays so that it stays. I've learned that if they don't want to take it off, I'm like, cool, then we're working, because it keeps me in my rhythm. So that's executive functions. It's literally the ability to execute, the stuff you need to do. It's adulting. Divergent versus convergent thinking. Divergent thinking is brainstorming. Convergent thinking is deducing down to the solution, right? ADHD people are phenomenal at divergent thinking. We're really good at just, I have all these ideas and all these things. But in order to enact any of those ideas, we need to do the convergent thinking of like boiling down and picking what I'm going to do, which of those ideas is going to be the thing to do, how do I bring other things into that and make sure I'm focused and executing and doing all the things. We kind of suck at convergent thinking. We're not nearly as good at convergent as we are at divergent. Convergent thinking is a skill that can be taught and can be developed. Most of this stuff is a skill that can be taught and developed. But we struggle with it. It's hard. Even these executive functions, most of them are skills that can be taught and we can develop them. People with ADHD are time blind.
Are they also name blind? Because I could not tell you a person's name, but I know their face.
That's working memory. It's over there, the light blue. Working memory is exactly what it sounds like. And this is why ADHD is a learning disability. Because learning is remembering. Like it's literally, drives me crazy that people with ADHD don't automatically get an IEP, those kids, because they should, because it's a learning disability. If I can't remember stuff, I haven't learned it. And if I have a disorder that prevents me from learning, then I have a learning disability, or prevents me from remembering. And this is working memory is also part of why we get interrupted so easily, right? Because working memory is, I'm doing the thing and I know where I'm going and what's going to come next and what's happening and all that stuff. And then if I get interrupted, a neurotypical person goes, don't come right back in. A neurotypical person who's a little tired, maybe hasn't slept, is like, right, and goes back in. That's where ADHD starts. And ADHD not uncommonly goes, blah, blah. And like nothing, right? Nothing. If we don't even know where we were or what was happening. It's just the nature of the beast. It's how ADHD works. And so we have to be able to come up with strategies and work around and all that stuff. And sometimes that strategy is going, hey, I am not at all listening to what you're saying to me. I have no idea what's going on with all the words that are coming out of your face, because the only way I'm going to be able to keep doing this really important thing is to go, make sure you finish that email and say this thing and that thing to that person and da-da-da-da. And I'm doing my best to process what's being said to me, but I'm not really prioritizing that with my working memory. I'm prioritizing the thing that I'm doing. And that means we need to communicate to the people who are talking to us, interrupting us, and saying, just give me a minute. And sometimes we're good at that, and sometimes we're not. And we'll get to why that is in a minute. Time blindness. We just don't understand time. Time doesn't make sense to people with ADHD. I'm preaching to the choir at least a little bit here. A minute is not always a minute, and an hour is not always an hour. And so we need clocks and timers and things to help us recognize how much time has gone by. Not just minute to minute, but even like a calendar, right? Like I was like, I don't have any idea what year the H got permanently connected to ADHD, because that was pre-COVID. Everybody, even my neurotypical friends, were like, yeah, time doesn't make any sense post-COVID. Like it's just things that I think happened a year ago. Turns out that was 3 years ago. And everybody has that to some degree now, but it's worse for people with ADHD. We had that from pre-COVID times. So it's this very fluid thing for us when it comes to time, where if we're really engaged with something, time seems like it flies by or slows down, depending, right? If I'm really engaged in this deep work, time might feel like it's going at this really comfortable but slow pace, or it might feel like it's flying, even though it hasn't been. And if it's boring and tedious and I don't like it, now time feels like it's really dragging. Some of you have done the boring, tedious thing, and you're like, I'm sure that I spent 4 hours doing that thing, and turns out it wasn't 4 hours. Like I like raked the yard in a half an hour, but I really thought it was 4 hours, and I have no idea how that was only a half an hour. And that's tricky because experientially, it was 4 hours. That's part of why people with ADHD get this resistance to doing certain tasks, because that task feels like 4 hours, even though it's only a half an hour. And that's where it's worth doing the mental gymnastics and teaching ourselves, like, oh, no, that really is only half an hour. Like, let's get the right mindset on this so that when we deal with it, we're doing it the right way. But that takes learning and thinking and teaching and planning and conversations and that kind of stuff. And the same is true if you have kids with kids. Kid does a homework assignment. You know it took them 15 minutes, but they're acting like it took them 2 hours. It kind of did take them 2 hours. They're not wrong. Like, their experience was that took forever. It just didn't, the clock didn't agree with that. So, yeah, the other piece to this time blindness that matters is a thing called the time horizon. The time horizon is the point at which in the future where things become imaginary. They just don't feel real anymore, right? For neurotypicals, they can go like 6 months out. No joke, for real. Yeah. People with ADHD, if you can go a week out, you're lucky. If you can go a month out, you're really lucky. Probably it's tomorrow feels real, and the day after tomorrow probably doesn't, unless you have something significant happening, and that thing might feel real even though it's further out, right? So like those of you who celebrate Christmas, whatever Christmas traditions you have probably feels real, because that gets reinforced every year, and a big deal is made out of it, and that dude's got lays on. I don't know why he has lays on, but he does. So those patterns, right, are able to sort of stick. And that's part of what's good about traditions and patterns and holidays and stuff. It helps us mark time and be aware of it even with ADHD. But it makes it tricky for getting things done. So like I need to, I don't know, we have to write chapter 6 for the book on Thursday, which is the day after tomorrow, so it doesn't matter. Tomorrow I'm going to be like, I should probably be thinking about chapter 6. Chapter 6 is a monster and we're having trouble with it. I know I'm not going to think about it tomorrow. I'm going to have time. Tomorrow it's Thursday is tomorrow. So today I didn't think about it at all. Tomorrow I'll think about it a little bit. And then Thursday in the morning while I'm at the gym, I'll be like, oh, right, chapter 6. Because that's time, right? That's where it feels important. Folks with ADHD also have sensory issues. The vestibular and the proprioception is that, like, I can be diagnosed as clumsy, right? Like that's playing a role there. Some of these are pretty obvious, right? Smell, sight, hearing, taste, touch. Those are, you've probably all heard of, I hope. We do struggle with them. Like if stuff is too loud, we can get overwhelmed and be sensorily overwhelmed by that. And then now we've got anxiety going. If it's too bright, or like I used to rip the tags out of my t-shirts when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. All my t-shirts had like a hole in the back because they itched me, right? And that, like, neurotypical people have these challenges too. It's just not quite as loud, right? It's not quite as big. Vestibular, interoception, and proprioception are a little bit different. Vestibular is basically balance. We don't let kids play with balance as much as we used to. They don't take risks as much as they used to. So that's not getting developed in kids kind of in general. But it's needed, right? It's like literally balancing is balancing, right? Like if you want to emotionally balance yourself, kind of balancing, right, can help. Because I have to bring my attention to what I'm doing, at least in some way, right? In order to be able to do this. I'm practiced because I take martial arts, so like this isn't that hard for me. But if it was, I would be like, oh man. I go to the gym and my trainer puts me on a Bosu ball like she did this morning. And I'm like supposed to swing a weight around my head and stand on the Bosu ball. And that was really hard. It took a lot of attention. But it also centered me and brought my anxiety down. Interoception is recognizing what's going on inside your body, right? Am I hungry? Do I feel sick? Do I need to go to the bathroom? Those kinds of things. I will never forget when I called my wife again and bothered her. When we were first dating, I'll never forget this. We were first dating, and we were driving around the Rotary in Somerville. And she turned to me and went, I think I'm getting sick. And I was like blew my mind. I was like, what do you mean you think you're getting sick? And you said something like, yeah, I think I'm going to have a cold in a few days. And I was like, what? How do you, huh? That's not a thing. You can't know you're going to get a cold in a few days. She did. She was right. Because for me, it's like urgent and important, right? Like, I guess it's important that I feel a little bit weird right now, but it's not urgent until my nose is running and I'm throwing up, right? I didn't even know you could know you were going to get sick. I didn't think that was real. Now I can kind of do it a little bit because I was like, it opened to my world, right? But that's interoception. And one area that this is difficult for folks with ADHD is like, all of a sudden I'm really hungry. All of a sudden I'm sick. All of a sudden I have to go to the bathroom. And I didn't have to before, right? Proprioception is your awareness of your body in space, right? So proprioception is me reaching over here-ish to grab my water bottle. I totally screwed it up. Damn it! But even my ability to throw that to my other hand, that's proprioception. I'm not looking at it, right? So, I thought I was here. So these are also things that folks with ADHD can struggle with. And it's also, these in particular can help ground a person with ADHD in their body and help manage anxiety. A lot of those comorbidities are anxiety. ODD, eating disorders, which wasn't on there, OCD, general anxiety disorders, addiction, and substance use. That's all anxiety. All of that stuff is anxiety. It's just anxiety getting expressed in different ways. Yeah.
Could you call this as well sensory processing disorder? Does that
Yep.
fit into like
Yeah,
that
and they're comorbid.
ADHD,
Yep,
or is
and
that
they're
one of those
comorbid.
Circles.
It's one of the circles. It's a comorbidity with ADHD because it's sort of like you can have sensory processing issues and not have ADHD, right? So it's comorbid. But if you have ADHD, probably to some degree there's going to be some sensory processing stuff happening. And it may or may not matter, right? It might be a big enough deal to be disruptive. It might just be like, I don't know, I just don't like the tag on my shirt and I do this every now and then and that's it.
Do you happen to know anything about how like sensory disabilities like could impact or like how that would like play with ADHD? Like for example, I have like a minor hearing disability, and so like loud environments are a little different for me than they are for other people, I guess.
So are you hard of hearing a little bit?
Yeah.
So that's gonna at least look like ADHD, right? Because now we're playing with like someone talks to you and you're like, huh? And are you saying huh because you have ADHD, or are you saying huh because you just didn't hear them? That's like I like to think of communication as a game of catch. So if you and I are talking, it's no different than I threw a football to you, and you catch it, and you throw it back to me, right? If I throw the football to you and you don't catch it, it could be, in this case, the football being me talking. It could be that you didn't really hear me, and that's why you didn't catch it. It could be that I didn't have your attention when I threw the football, and that's the reason you didn't catch it, right? It looks the same, especially for neurotypical people who don't have the same kind of unreliable attention that people with ADHD do. A neurotypical person can walk in a room mid-sentence, and the neurotypicals will be like, yup, da-da-da, and join right in that conversation. Whereas someone walks in mid-sentence, and I'm in here, and they're talking at me, I have to pull my attention out of what I was doing before I can find out what they're saying. And so I missed the whole sentence and have no context. I probably missed half of the second one, and I'm lost, right? Same, I imagine when you have a hearing issue, same is true. Is that what you were thinking, or are you going in a different direction?
I guess I don't fully know how to articulate it, but I just wonder if it would make things like harder. Like I've been considering the fact that I might have ADHD lately, but like I'm wondering if perhaps that attention, like you were just going over, is like, was it missed when I was younger because it's like, oh, it's like, you can't hear.
Yeah. No, I don't think she has ADHD. She's just deaf, right? Like, sure. That was really loud, sorry. But also maybe you have ADHD too. There's no reason you can't. Not that you necessarily do either. It could go either way. Go ahead.
A question about auditory processing.
Yep.
One of my children has auditory processing.
Also comorbid with ADHD, yep.
Yeah, and as now that she's an adult, I've said to her, I really think maybe you have ADHD and you just never focused on that and only focused on your auditory process.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah,
just wondered if that could be maybe a factor for this lady too.
yeah, it could be. And that's part of what I love about working with ADHD and people who have ADHD, even just within the context of ADHD. I work with people who all have the same problem for a million different reasons. And I have to figure out how we're getting to where we are. And then when you bring in auditory processing, or have mildly hard of hearing or whatever, now it's like another layer of like, okay, cool. Why is this tricky? And how do we adjust for that, right? I would start looking at attention through other means, right? Like, do you have trouble reading? Because if you're reading a book and I don't mean like dyslexia, I mean like I read and I get like a paragraph or two in and then I'm kind of like and maybe it's the story has got you imagining something else over here, or you're just worrying about what you're going to have for dinner. But if that's going on, that's a better indication because that's got nothing to do with hearing, right? So transitions. People with ADHD struggle with transitions. They're really hard. Because transitions are way more complicated than anybody thinks that they are. This is my model. I need to get an artist to do a better job of it. I threw this together today. Because I keep telling people this and they need a visual. People think a transition is one thing. It's 9 things. 1 and 9 are not the same. This is a single transition. So when I'm transitioning, right, I have to transition out of what I'm doing, right? So I don't know, I'm reading a book and I have to go have dinner, right, with the family. So I have to transition out of my book, and then there's a gap where I'm not reading my book, but I'm also not having dinner with the family yet. And then I have to transition into having dinner with the family. That's 3 pieces for every one transition. Any one of those places, things can go wrong, including this right here, this line where I'm exiting the thing, like though that's the it's really 6 transitions and 9 different pieces. And the gap is like, oh man, we'll get to the gap. The other part though is I have to transition in 3 different ways for each of those 3 transitions, and they don't happen at the same time necessarily. So I have to physically transition. I have to put my book down, I have to walk to the kitchen, I have to sit down in the chair or grab a plate or whatever, right? I have to physically transition out of the book and into dinner. I also have to cognitively transition. I have to stop thinking about the story that I'm reading, or whatever it is, the nonfiction, whatever I'm reading. I have to stop thinking about that and go over to dinner, right? So that I don't sit down at dinner and go like, but Han and Leia are having trouble with Grand Admiral Thrawn, because that's what I'm reading right now. And I have to emotionally make that transition, right? So I have to like put down whatever emotions are in the book and have appropriate emotional interaction at dinner. Which is fine if it's like just I'm reading a book and it's not a big deal, right? But if I'm doing something difficult or competitive or something like that, right? Like if any of you play video games or have children who play video games or friends who play video games or anything like that, and have seen someone go from playing like Minecraft or Fortnite and then go have dinner, it's a nightmare from everybody I've ever talked to is how to deal with that. Because their video game gets the kid or the adult, that we're both, dysregulated emotionally and really frustrated emotionally or whatever, right? And they come to dinner, come to whatever the interaction is, and they're not in a place to have a reasonable conversation. They're not in a place to manage what's going on. And again, just because I physically transitioned, that doesn't mean I've cognitively or emotionally transitioned. And the only cue we have is the physical one. So we often see someone physically transition and we're like, dope, they're ready to go. No, I am not. That is not true. So folks with ADHD, often we hyperactively make the physical transition. That can happen. But we struggle with emotional regulation. So our emotional processing and ability to transition might lag behind. And now I'm not in the right, we say frame of mind, but it's really emotional state, right? And I may or may not have been able to do the cognitive jump. And if I did, I might have done the cognitive jump with anxiety, right? I might have been like, oh my God, I have to be da 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 da, right? They're going to be so mad at me if I don't get to dinner or whatever it is that I'm doing. This is why commutes are so great. This is the power and value of having a commute. You're going to throw up. Commute. But this is why commutes are valuable, is commutes allow time for cognitive and emotional transitioning into and out of work, right? So if you work from home, building in that time is a useful idea. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do it like in your home office. You could take a walk around the block and that could be your commute, right? I do this with clients. I have clients who we've built them commutes that are really just time for them to process emotionally and cognitively and get themselves squared away to be able to do the work, or often where it's more important is coming home. I've got clients that like their job is to just tell people what to do all day, and there's conflict with their spouse because they don't put that part of them down before they go into the home because they're already in the home because they work from home. So they're bossing and telling everybody what to do, and then they go step out of the room and turn to their spouse, and it's the same blah, 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 and that doesn't make for happy matrimony. Any questions on this stuff?
Is this where the walking to a room and forgetting what you're doing comes in?
That's working memory,
Okay.
and I can solve it for you right now. Yeah, that's fun. So when we change like our environment, when we change the scene, right? Our brain resets. So when you step through that door, your brain is going to reset a little bit, and that's why you forget stuff, because you walk to the kitchen from the living room or whatever, and your brain resets. It happens to everybody. But people with ADHD, when they're working memory problems, we don't hold on to the information as well. So if you instead go, I'm getting a glass of milk, when you walk through the door, then you're more likely to remember it. It's not like a perfect solution, but the odds are drastically higher. It's like a 99% chance you're going to do it right. But you have to remember to go, I'm getting a glass of milk, which goes back to a working memory problem. Yeah. Have you guys heard of masking? Is this a thing people are familiar with? Okay. Not that kind of masking, but that's valid too. So masking is just trying to pretend you don't have ADHD and act like you don't. Is basically what it is. And like some of this stuff, I stole this from Simply Psychology. Some of the stuff I like, some of it I don't. Heavy reliance on reminders and timers to appear productive. Rely on all the reminders and timers that you need. The only thing that makes that kind of okay is appear productive. Like do that to be productive. Once you're done, don't feel like you need to appear anymore because you are. But it's nice to not have to mask. And masking can burn you out. Masking can wear you down. So finding environments and social groups and things where you can just be who you are and not have to mask is good and healthy and a thing to pursue. It's not always possible. Being able to mask is also a necessary skill for success. You have to be able to do that. I am not a person who is pro never mask. because that's a recipe for disaster. But I am a person who is pro find spaces in your life where you don't have to mask. And if you have a job where you have to mask really hard all the time, maybe try to find another job where you can mask a little bit less. And also manage your ADHD symptoms, because managing ADHD symptoms is not the same as masking, right? There are things I need to do in order to be successful. And sometimes my ADHD symptoms get in the way and cause me problems, but I'm not masking those things. I'm just trying to fix them so they don't get in my way anymore. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So if you come from an environment where you've had to mask very hard from a very early age, how do you begin to unlearn those behaviors, and how do you even recognize them?
And that's part of the problem with masking, right? Is because hiding in that question, potentially, I don't know your brain or your life, but potentially is, I don't even know who I am if I'm not masking. So what does that mean? And I'm with you if that's true, because I have that too. And I don't mask much. I don't have to mask that much because my job is to have ADHD. So I kind of should have ADHD, right? But I also don't. There's times I go to the ADHD conference and I'm not any different than I am in regular life. And I know people who go to the conference and are like, wow, right? Because their masks are gone. That's not how I work. I would find some groups of people who are comfortable with neurodiversity. And if they're comfortable with neurodiversity, they understand masking and know what it is and that kind of stuff. And see how they are, and maybe try that on, right? Try on their stuff as a mask. Put on the non-mask mask, I guess, and just see what it's like. And is it comfortable? Is it not comfortable? How's that work, right? For me, personally, there's certain levels of emotionality that don't work for me, right? I'm kind of a guy who controls himself, or tries to most of the time. I don't drink, I don't do drugs, so that sort of party part is not so much. But I can talk too much, so this is my job. I fixed it. It's let's just lean into that a little bit, shall we? I like attention, right? I enjoy being the center of attention, so this is my job. So play into the parts of your ADHD that are tricky or hard, or even the ones you're I don't really love that about myself. For a long time, I was I don't want to be the center of attention. I don't want to be that guy. I shouldn't be that guy. And then eventually I was but I am, and I'm good at it. So I am that guy. I have big main character energy, and I just need to accept it, and then work really hard to be a supporting character instead of a main character, right? So play with those things, even the parts of you that you're I really don't like this about me. Because that maybe is the story you've been told since you were little, right? The culture, community, family, whatever that you grew up with, they told you a story about what was okay and what wasn't okay, and who you had to be and who you couldn't be, and all this stuff. That story is in you, and it's going to be in you. But that story doesn't have to always be the one you listen to, or always be the one you tell. Think about what story you want. What do you want your story to be? And start trying to tell that story. It's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to be weird. You're going to feel like an imposter. That might be because it's not the right story. You haven't found the right story yet. It might be because you're listening to that script that you were taught growing up. I'm sorry?
This is awful.
Yeah,
It's good. No, it's good. It's so hard.
it is. I'm not
To
pretending
take
to.
all this.
But here's the thing.
It's-
Here's the thing. I'm going to go anti-racism for a second, if you can bear with me. I did a lot of anti-racism work throughout my years. One of the things we learn in anti-racism work is that, when you walk down the street and you see the big tall black guy and you're oh my God, he's going to murder me. Because you grew up on 1980s action flicks, and that's what the big tall black guy does in the action flicks. So that's the script that you were taught. That's the story you learned. That's some nonsense, and you don't need to listen to it. You don't have to cross the street. You don't have to be afraid. You can just keep walking down, because that big, tall black guy doesn't care about you and is not interested in anything that you have. He's just walking down the street, right? That racist story that I grew up with as a 47-year-old white guy who watched a lot of action movies, I've been able to recognize that story and rewrite it, right? Like re-encode it. And the piece of that that's anti-racist, besides all the stuff I just said, is that first reflex that happens, that first impulse, that's the culture you grew up in. That doesn't mean it's your thought. That thought is coming from the culture you grew up in. The thought that comes after that is yours. And sometimes that first thought is just the thought, and it's not one you have to push back on or challenge. Dope, don't push back on it. It's fine, it's healthy. But if it's a thought you don't like, challenge it. See what happens. Was that like useful? I mean, some of you are like that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, God.
Yeah, so masking is a lot like perfectionism, right? Because that's what masking is. Masking is like, I have to be perfect all the time. No, you don't. I started this group 5 minutes late. I'm leaning on a podium. This is not how you're supposed to present. Do you know how many times I've said and Lots. I don't care. Because it doesn't matter.
I have something in my wallet
Yeah.
at work that has helped me with this. It's called done is better than perfect.
Yes.
And I need that every day to remind myself.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. So there's two kinds of perfection, right? Striving and concern. Perfectionistic striving is trying to accomplish stuff, leaving no stone unturned or motivated by positive outcomes. That's diligence, right? Concerning perfectionism is when you're trying to avoid mistakes, you're afraid of failing, you're afraid of being seen negatively by others, that kind of stuff. That's less good. That's not healthy. That's toxic perfectionism, right? Ideally, we're like this turned up to 9. See how I didn't go to 11 and turned it away from perfection instead? Like, we don't need perfectionism. Good enough is good enough. Done is better than perfect, right? But when you have ADHD, it gets confusing and becomes unclear. Because as a guy who, all through high school, all through middle school, I looked at all the other kids and I was like, how do they perform perfectly all the time without fail every day? Because for me to perform at the level that my peers were performing at, I had to be perfect, and I couldn't. I couldn't maintain that level of consistency. It wasn't possible. And so I developed a whole lot of perfectionistic concern because I couldn't meet those expectations. I couldn't do my homework every night. I didn't know how to, I still don't know how to study. I'm 47 years old and teach kids how to do it, but I don't really get it. I don't know how to practice. I have a black belt test in a year, and I don't know my forms well enough. I just suck at practicing because that's ADHD, right? And it's hard, and it sucks, and it's painful. And it makes me feel inadequate, like, more often than I want to admit. And the only thing that has gotten me past that is giving myself permission to have ADHD. Right? Like, I just have ADHD. And sometimes I'm going to be amazing, and sometimes I'm going to suck. There are days when I'm the greatest person walking the face of the planet. And there are days when I don't know why they let me out of my house. And I wish that was a joke. It lands like a joke, but it's not really a joke. Like, that's really how I feel. And it's difficult. And what makes this even more fun, that fear of being viewed negatively by others, brings us to rejection sensitivity. People with ADHD are incredibly sensitive to rejection. Right? We struggle with that. And that makes us have trouble with making friends and it's difficult to receive feedback. We overreact when we're feeling hurt. It leads to people pleasing. I'm certainly a people pleaser. I've gotten better at it. It makes it hard to stand up for ourselves. Guys, I had to stand up to myself at the ADHD conference to the ADHD conference. It was hard. It's really hard. I needed a whole bunch of people to say to me, "You're Brendan Mahan, and they need to respect you." Which, I don't know how that happened. I don't know how I got to the point where people got to say to me, "You're Brendan Mahan." That's weird. Middle school Brendan doesn't understand that. 47-year-old Brendan is working on it. But, that's the deal, right? Part of why I get to say that is Danny Donovan, this is her art. I literally texted her to ask her if I could use that slide because she's a friend of mine. So if any of you are like, I know Danny Donovan's work, she's dope. She's my buddy. That's where I am in the world of ADHD. So this rejection sensitivity is hard, but here's the cool part. The inverse of that lights us up. So when people are like, you're great, you're phenomenal, I'm really happy for you, I'm really excited for you, I'm really proud of you, what you did was phenomenal, what you did was great, you're accepted, we want you here, we're happy, da-da-da, all that stuff, we will go to the ends of the earth for those people. That motivates us just as strongly as this stuff rips us apart. Right? And here's a little thing. How are we doing on time? Got like 15 minutes. Here's a little thing that I want to leave you with. Not now, because we've got another 15 minutes. But a thing I want you thinking about is my current theory is that outside of failures that will like destroy you, like lost your job, failure stuff, like outside of those, I think mostly we're not really afraid of failure. I think what people are really afraid of is the rejection that we assume is going to come with the failure. And that matters because if you are the person who is in charge of the team, of the family, of the company, business, whatever, if you can communicate to people who might be worried about failing you that you got their back and that it's going to be fine and that you're not going to reject them, they're not going to get fired, they're not going to you're not going to hate them forever, the failures become easier. And that means they can tell you about them. Because sometimes they hide them, right? But if you can just come up and say, look, I screwed this thing up, what do I do? How do I fix it? It becomes easier. And that matters, especially if I know there's some parents in the audience, especially for your kids. Because if it's not okay for your kid to make a mistake, they're going to lie to you. And then it's probably going to not be okay for them to lie to you. And they're going to get better at lying to you. The math is not, I will stop lying to you because you said it's not okay to lie. The math is, I will get better at lying to you because I have ADHD and I can't avoid these failures. They're going to happen, and I know it. And since I can't avoid them, I'm going to get better at hiding them instead of just owning them because it's safe to own them. So the more we can do to make it safe for our kids, for our employees, for our whatever, to have mistakes, for our spouses and our friends, to make mistakes and screw up and hey, we're still friends, we're still buddies, we're still good, the easier all that stuff becomes. Does anybody need a break?
Tissue?
Huh?
Tissue?
I don't have any.
Yeah, I have one spot.
Oh, here we go. This is the best I can do.
Play with your-
You want the whole thing?
Yeah. But you didn't expect this to happen, did you?
I didn't, but it happens sometimes.
Right.
So this is a less emotionally charged one. ADHD, we struggle with capturing our thoughts, which is sometimes okay and sometimes not okay, right? Like, just come up with ways to capture your thoughts, whether it's typing stuff in your phone, having sticky notes, a to-do list, because those are thoughts, right? What do I have to do? I send myself emails sometimes at night when I'm like, what do I have to do tomorrow? I send that email to myself. Or before I wrap up, part of my transition at the end of my day, which varies, is I send myself an email of like, this is what you're doing tomorrow, so that I have those thoughts captured, and I'm not just going, I'll remember that I have to edit the podcast or whatever. So we want to have some ways to capture our thoughts. We also want to capture our clutter. This is like so hard to say with my wife right here in the audience, knowing how bad it is home. It's all my fault. So clutter is the perfect storm of low dopamine availability, leading to difficulty activating on important tasks that don't feel urgent, and needing to externalize prompts, so I need to see stuff, and being better at divergent thinking than convergent thinking, and trouble with planning. All that stuff is a straight line to clutter. Like, that's what's up, right? So on here, we've got an ADD crusher, my friend Alan Brown. That's his blog post on decluttering. And then I had an episode of the podcast where Cindy Jobs organizing in shared spaces. So not just home, but Other places do. And then comes the wall of awful. I'm going to speed through this because there's videos that you can watch. The wall of awful is my model for the emotional impact of repeated failure that comes with ADHD. Every time we fail, we get a brick in our wall. I'm not going to bang this drum too hard because some of us are already struggling. Those bricks pile up. And eventually, there's this emotional wall between us and the thing that we have to do that we fail at and struggle with regularly. And it's hard to get past that wall. So, solutions, there are 5 ways people try to get past the wall of awful. 2 don't work, 1 works but isn't necessarily healthy, and 2 work. The 2 that don't work are staring at it and going around it. You're staring at the wall, you're not engaging with it, you're not doing anything. You try to go around it, you're going to do something else. You're just going to get distracted. You're going to not do it. The way that works but isn't always healthy is smashing. Smashing through the wall is just using strong emotions to push through the wall that is so strong, but those emotions are usually anger and frustration and anxiety. And that damages relationships because I'm either going, fine, I'll do it, shut up, and I'm barking and getting angry at the person that asked me to do the thing, or I'm flipping my hood up and I'm like, what's wrong with me? Why do I suck so much? Why can't I just do this? Oh my God, I have to do this. If I don't do this, I'm going to be so mad or anxiety push, right? Not great. By the way, fight, flight, freeze. Stress response. The 2 that work and are healthy require more skills because they don't happen instinctively. That is climbing the wall, which is sitting with those emotions, dealing with them, processing them, facing them, accepting the fact that I don't want to do this thing, but I still have to do it and all that stuff to get past the wall, or putting a door in it, which is changing our emotional state. This is also changing our emotional state, so these 2 are connected. This is a more skilled version, right? So if I don't want to exercise, but then I turn on the Rocky IV soundtrack and I'm listening to Eye of the Tiger sing about the eye, or Survivor sing about the Eye of the Tiger, now I'm good to go, right? Now I suddenly am doing push-ups on the floor. I might not get to the gym, but I'm exercising. Or I might listen to a podcast that brings me comfort because it's my friends that I don't really know, but it seems like they're my friends because parasocial relationships. And that makes me feel connected and comfortable, and that makes it easier for me to do the thing. Or it's a bunch of really successful people talking about being successful, and that makes me want to be successful. And now I go and do the thing because that's success, right? That's the wall of awful. In a little bit, there'll be another thing for a YouTube channel. There's a YouTube channel called How to ADHD. It's run by a woman named Jessica McCabe. My wall of awful model, she and I did a couple videos on it. More will be coming when the book comes out. This is what I'm writing the book about. So, the wall of awful. This is the number 1 way to manage ADHD. This is the first thing. You have permission to have ADHD. You are allowed to struggle. You are allowed to be forgetful. You are allowed to lose track of time. You are allowed to talk too much. You're allowed to space out. You're allowed to get frustrated. You're allowed to be mad at yourself. You're allowed to be uncertain. You're allowed to have ADHD. Just don't quit. Keep moving forward. It's hard. I can help. I can help sometimes even for no money, but usually I need money because we're in a mortgage. But this is a thing that is manageable. But you got to give yourself permission to have it. And part of giving yourself permission to have ADHD is accepting the fact that sometimes you're just going to suck at life. But it's not going to last. It's going to be hard for a little while, and then you're going to bounce back, and it's going to get better. You're going to be okay. Because you're going to be okay. Medication. Again, me and my friend Carolyn Lynch Parcells talking about ADHD meds, stimulants and non-stimulants. This I'm going to make fun of very well for a minute because I don't like this slide, and that's why I put it up here. So, stimulants increase dopamine, norepinephrine. They boost your energy and attention and alertness. They're usually either amphetamine or methamphetamine-based drugs. There's immediate and extended release. Extended release is less likely to be abused. Oh man, is that some nonsense. not because extended release is less likely to be abused, but because ADHD meds are not abused enough for it to need to be on this slide. They just aren't. That's why. Drives me crazy. Non-stimulants don't work as quickly, and you can't usually like take them or not take them. You can't like take a vacation from non-stimulants, but you shouldn't take a vacation from stimulants either, because I don't know about some of you in the audience, but it would be silly for me to be like, I'm just not going to wear my glasses on the weekends. That's kind of what you're doing when you take an ADHD med vacation. There's different side effects than stimulants, whatever. They're less likely to be abused than stimulants. Again, like there just isn't that much abuse happening. And they do treat other stuff. So mostly that's for me to rant that we don't really have an issue with stimulants being abused. Are they abused on college campuses a little bit? Yeah, a little bit. But like, most kids with ADHD on college campuses are like, no, I need my meds. Like, you're not going to sell you my Ritalin because I'll fail. I'm 20 years old. What the hell is wrong with you? Other ways to sort of manage ADHD. Shred. Sleep, habits, relationships, exercise, and diet. The more we can get that stuff nailed down, the better. Obviously, I struggle with the diet part. It's getting a little better. The exercise stuff is a lot better. So we want to make sure we're getting 8 hours of sleep. That's what we want. Yeah, I'm not wrong. My sensei, Phil, was like, 6 hours of sleep is fine. I get 6 hours, it's good. I meditate during the day, everything's fine. For years. Then he got a new job and got 8 hours of sleep. And he was like, Brendan, it's totally different. Like, I finally got 8 hours of sleep. I'm so clear-headed. I was like, yeah. So you want to get 8 hours of sleep. Go to bed at the same time, get up at the same time every night. Practice sleep hygiene where you're not looking at screens if you can help it the night right before you go to bed. Like read, dim the lights in the house because that's going to cue your body that it's time to go to bed. We try to keep things as calm as possible before bedtime like that. Habits are everything I've been talking about. Habits are powerful because they eliminate the need for executive function. ADHD people, we struggle to establish habits, but once they're established, they tend to set really firmly for us. That's how our brains work. We tend to, once the habits gets established, it tends to be more rigid and sticky for us than neurotypicals, but it's harder to get there. So 6 of one, half dozen of it. Habits mean I don't have to remember stuff anymore. I don't have to think about it, right? For example, you might need to remember to brush your teeth. Like that's a thing for ADHD folks. We don't always remember to brush. But when we go into the bathroom, we're not like, where is my toothbrush? Where is the toothpaste? Now what do I do? Like that doesn't happen. We just automatically do it, right? You autopilot because it's a habit. The more things you can turn into a habit, the better your life will go. The smoother things will go. And it's probably worth it. I know this is something I'm trying to do. I'm not successful at it yet. I had better habits pre-COVID than I have post-COVID. So one of my goals for 2025 is to, 1, remember what those habits were, and 2, try to reestablish them. Because I think I'll be a better person if I can do that. So that's something to think about. Relationships are critical for healthy, long-lived life, right? Like it's useful to have people who care about you, who can support you, who will talk to you about your struggles or just share fun, silly, nonsense moments with you. And people who have better, stronger relationships live longer. That said, it's not necessarily easy, especially as adults, to make friends and figure out how to do that. My friend Caroline McGuire is writing a book about that will be coming out probably around the same time mine comes out because we're on sort of the same pattern. But there are folks out there working to talk about how to do that. One thing is to have a third place. So home is place 1, job or school is place 2. What's your third place? What's the other place that you go to? That's a place to find friends, right? To make new relationships. Matt back there is a friend of mine. This is how I made him my friend, literally, because I was tactical about it. I have a projector and a screen and watch movies in my backyard. Movies in the backyard is cool and high interest. And we drew a whole bunch of people to our house to watch movies in our backyard. And then some of them were cool, and some of them fell off. And that's okay, right? And the movies in the backyard led to board games, right? Because movies in the backyard is like a low investment, not a lot of, like, you don't really know. Then you play board games together, and you get to know each other, and like, is this person insanely competitive and I don't want to hang out with them? Or are they cool, right? Are they able to be chill and hang out? So having a high interest something that kind of draws people towards you, and then like something, once you've kind of gotten those initial bumps of like exposure and kind of seeing people and that piece, then you shift into something that's a little more intimate, like a board game, right? That's like lowercase intimate. This is not going inappropriate here. I mean, Matt's handsome, but then we want to then we do that, right? And then it grows from there, and we see what comes next, and we find interest and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and also pick up something new, right? What kind of people do you want to be friends with? Like, do you want to be friends with the geeks? Cool, play D&D. Do you want to be friends with like the more athletic folks? Go join like rec soccer or rec basketball or something. Do you want to be friends with the geeky athletes? Ballroom dance, right? Like wherever you can do it. Exercise, diet, pretty straightforward. Cardio is king for ADHD because it oxygenates the brain, helps us focus better. And then diet, like shop the supermarket perimeter. That's going to be better. We tend to need more protein. Fiber is good. Simple carbs spike the blood sugar, and then you get brain fog because you crash from the spike. And we ADHD folks start with brain fog, so simple carbs are not that great. But I will say they're delicious, and that's problematic. Externalize your prompts. Just get them outside. Like we are bad at prompting ourselves. We're bad at remembering. We're bad at activating internally. We tend to need our prompts to be external. Alexa is fantastic for that because it says things out loud that you hear and then hopefully do. I have a couple that I need to change because they're not happening at good times anymore. Sticky notes are pretty good. Alarms to wake you up, remind you to do things. This is our literally like, this is a little after, but this is our COVID schedule for when the boys were homeschooling with me. It's just have a schedule that like you write down and is there. You see what you're doing and what's going on and what's your list or whatever. It can be huge if it needs to be. And also like give your friend, spouse, whoever permission to give you reminders. Right? Amy does that for me on occasion. Can you just remind me to get it out? And it's not always fair because I am kind of going, hey, your executive functions are better than mine. Can I lean on them for a minute? But half the time me saying it out loud helps me remember what it is that I need to do. Right? Which I said something on the way here that I don't remember what it was. It sucks, neither do you, but that's okay. On the way here, I was like, oh, I need to remember to blah, blah, blah later. And I don't remember what it was. It'll come back to me. So externalizing prompts, including, hey, can I use your brain, right? When I worked in schools, the only reason I ever knew when meetings were was because other staff members told me about stuff like, hey, report cards are due in a week. And I was like, oh, crap, thanks for telling me. But if I didn't have coworkers, if I worked from home somehow and taught, it would have been a nightmare. I would have been terrible at knowing what was going on. A calendar is another really good external prompt. Keep a calendar. I highly recommend a Google Calendar type thing because you can see where your gaps are, right? Like the way I use my calendar is I only put in time when I'm responsible for other people, time I've committed to other people, with the exception of a little bit like this podcast thing is for me, but and this planning and this prepping a workshop. So those are big things, but otherwise I don't put much in here. So like I've got a 2-hour gap here where nothing's here. It doesn't mean I'm not doing anything. I'm going to be emailing and thinking with social media and all that kind of stuff in those holes. But this helps me to keep aware of what's going on. It visualizes time for me really effectively. And then like the green is sort of physical stuff, the yellow is clients, the orange is not client stuff for the business. Blue is personal, so like I have to get the boys somewhere in this window because they stay after on those 2 days at clubs, and I never know when they're gonna text me to pick them up. So I'm like, I'll just clear an hour to go get you. I went grocery shopping this morning, and I just put that in so that it looked like I was doing a little more stuff. It is sort of what I do. I go to the trainer, then I go to grocery shopping, and then I go to PD. But keep a calendar. Also, if you are someone who has had a 504 and IEP, if your kid has a 504 and IEP, or if you just want to look up 504s and IEPs, they're designed to help kids with ADHD do stuff and to help people communicate with kids who have ADHD. All teachers are doing is communicating. So IEP and 504 accommodations are great for adults to know about because we can use them too. Does that make sense? Literally, last Friday, I was talking to the high muckety mucks in the ADHD conference and said this to them. I had to say to them, like, I think we sometimes forget that the people who do this, who work on this conference, almost all of us have ADHD, and we just need to factor that in because it's the nature of big organizations. They just treat everybody like they're neurotypical. But it doesn't make sense for the conference to do that. So I was like, let's figure this out. And I said to them, why don't we just look at IEPs and 504s and then come up with ways to better manage stuff? And so they're doing that now. I used to teach, guys. Let me help. The other thing is down there on the far side is a thing called Ask Jan. Jan stands for Job Accommodation Network. If you're, I don't know, mildly deaf, you can go to Ask Jan and find out what are reasonable accommodations in the workplace that you should be looking for. Now, here's the caveat, though. If you're asking for accommodations in the workplace, you're disclosing your ADHD. That is not always safe. I don't necessarily recommend it. In fact, I kind of don't recommend it unless your job is incredibly dope. Indeed, I have a client who works for Indeed. Worked wonderfully for her. She got put on a performance improvement plan twice and still has her job and is dope. Because they were like, oh, we were doing stuff wrong and it worked out. So Indeed is doing it right, but not every company is. So be careful with asking for accommodations. Be careful with disclosing. You can ask for accommodations without disclosing, but you need to know what you're going to ask for, and that's where Jan comes in. Wrapping it up, bringing it in for a landing at 8:34, so I went over by 4 minutes. This is some stuff. This is me. It's specifically how to contact me. This one is the first wall of awful video for How to ADHD. If you don't know about How to ADHD, you should. It's a YouTube channel with all kinds of amazing movies or videos and things, and Jessica's great. Danny Donovan has a product called the Anti-Planner that I meant to bring with me, but I have ADHD and I forgot. It's like a workbook for getting stuff done. It's amazing. I cannot recommend it highly enough, but it's so cool that people from China have been making knockoffs of the Anti-Planner. So don't order it on Amazon, only order it from her website, because the Chinese knockoffs are really low quality, and I'm not even kidding, I've seen them, and terrible. She's spending thousands of dollars a month on lawyers to try to get her own Amazon page back in control. Yeah, it's because it turns out Amazon, when you order something on Amazon, you don't know who's going to send it to you. They just like anybody who is selling that product, and they go with the cheaper one. So because there's knockoffs, she's struggling. It's like a $52 book, but I'm telling you, you'll use it for the rest of your life. It's literally like a recipe book, a workbook for like, I'm feeling this kind of way and struggling to start because of it. Let me flip to that emotion, and there's activities to like start. There's like games and things and ideas and strategies to get started. It's great. And then this is Attitude Magazine, which is something else you should know about. You should know about Jess. You should know about Danny. Attitude Magazine is the ADHD magazine. 25 articles on adult ADHD. But here, I will be writing an article for them in the not too distant future about ADHD in boys.